Welcome everybody, this is Tim Watrous, President of Digital Advisors.
And this is Kevin Gordon, President of Capital Advisors Group.
We'd like to welcome you to our K-12 Politics and Tech video series.
Our objective is to give you the absolute latest of what's going on in Sacramento that affects public school districts, obviously, and as well as all the technology stuff that's going on that's so vital to delivering for kids these days.
And remember, if you find these videos useful, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and share out over social media. You're our marketing team. We appreciate your support, and let's go ahead and get started. All right, welcome everybody. Tim Watrous back with another episode of K-12 Politics and Tech. President of Digital Advisors, of course, and as always, we have the President of Capital Advisors, Kevin Gordon, co-host of the show. Kevin, glad you're here.
Great to be here.
Well, as always, no shortage of news this week, and we want to talk a little bit about vaccinations. Can you tell us what's been going on in Sacramento in terms of vaccinations, please?
Well, on the vaccination issue, the governor just announced this week, late in the week, a plan that really validates what he'd been talking about earlier, which is a 10% set aside of all vaccinations that are given across the state, or 75,000 doses per week that's going to be made available. In addition to that, the goal is to not end up, turning upside down the vaccination priority that we had going on for seniors and other parts of the descending level of priority that's already in existence, but to actually supplement vaccinations using extra vaccination supply to make sure that we're dealing with the needs across education. So educators are up in a very, very high priority. They're rolling this out through County Office of Education, as I think many people are aware. They're using federal resources, state resources, and then also obviously working through locals. They're doing the distribution by virtue of certain types of codes that county offices are distributing to school leaders in districts so that they can access that. There are complications with regard to the coordination by the state with county health officers and then county offices of education that needs to get ironed out a little bit better. This time we're kind of on the leading edge of knowing what's going on, and county health officers are catching up and essentially in some places saying, we're going to get to this priority the governor has when we get to it, but until they get the direct order, implementation is a little bit slow with county health officers on this. So we're waiting for that to catch up. I think within a week, this stuff is going to get ironed out a little bit, but yeah, higher priority, getting people vaccinated, really responding to the call for vaccination first before we do broad reopening. Everything's converging at the same time as school districts work toward reopening. You get the vaccinations on the street, stuff is starting to happen. So it's good. It's all good. A little confusing in the beginning, but we're headed in a good direction.
Well, certainly 11 months in, glad to be hearing about numbers of vaccinations. And, speaking of reopening, obviously there's a lot of debate going on still. Can you tell us a little bit about the dynamics between that debate in Sacramento about reopening, please?
Yeah, we've been waiting. It's been like our long wait, remember, on the federal stimulus. We've been waiting week after week on the governor and legislative leaders to get together on a compromise relative to the expenditure, the $2 billion for the incentive on reopening, as well as the $4.6 billion that would be used for extended learning and intervention. And now it looks like they're coming together. Last week, we reported that the news was they were going to probably combine those dollar amounts in one big program that would do both. Now it looks like they will keep them separated. And I'm actually happy for that because COVID testing and the cadences that were being required were so high that I thought you burn through that $2 billion. And the idea of it encroaching into the 4.6 that we want for extended learning and intervention was problematic because that's for a very important separate purpose. And mixing the two, I think, is an issue. The other thing is that relative to the money that would use for COVID testing, we think that's a health expense, and we're going to continue lobbying, particularly after perhaps the Biden money lands when we ultimately get it. We would argue that some of the state's health and welfare dollars be used to pay for that rather than Prop 98 money. So keeping them separate is a good thing. We can expect probably a vote as early as next week on a compromise proposal that's coming together today. So you'll hear more about it early next week. Legislature gets moving hot and heavy on it. We're going to address amendments to what was not the greatest proposal that came out of the assembly on testing, on a number of the issues and concerns that we had raised. We'd raised issues regarding the collective bargaining mandate. Hopefully, we're going to get through and get some positive amendments to this package that apparently there is a two-house deal, as well as the governor being on board as well.
All right, well, thank you for that, and we'll look for more as that debate continues, and hopefully we'll get some resolution to that soon. One thing I wanted to follow up on from last week's show on the tech side, we talked about the SEC offering basically a $50 subsidy for families of low-income families to have internet at home. Also $75 on tribal land and $100 for a device. That basically the FCC has approved that plan. They're saying they're going to have details out within 60 days, which seems aggressive, but it's welcome. And again, just a reminder, we're 11 months in. I believe this is the first significant action we've seen from the FCC. Glad to see Rosenworcel in there kind of shaking things up right out of the gate, and we'll keep you posted on that as well. So I know we talked a little bit about the governor's vaccination efforts. Kevin, was there anything you wanted to add in addition to that, or did we cover that one already?
We cover it. We're good.
Okay. Also wanted to bring up the fact that in Congress, Congressman Billy Long, there's a proposal to eliminate municipal broadband, and that would mean government-run broadband. If your school district or your county office of education is planning to build its own or is building its own network, there's a little bit of risk from the federal government. This came to me from site members. I want to thank the folks who sent that in. We wanted to call that out. And again, this is something that you might want to do a little advocacy for as you're building your own networks, because there might be some trouble back in DC. So make sure you connect on that. Kevin, can you talk to us a little bit about spring assessment waivers and modification, please?
Right. So this week, the other developments was the State Board of Education met to talk about what are we going to do with regard to academic assessment and the normal spring testing that we do. What they really were waiting on was what was going to be said by the U.S. Department of Ed under a Biden administration. And there was some anticipation, given the very strong opposition to doing the testing this year by labor groups, particularly led by the National Education Association, that the Biden administration might, in fact, decide to do a blanket waiver all across the country, much like what was done last spring, so that we didn't do the testing then. That was not the case. The U.S. Department of Education did issue guidance say that they are not going to be doing blanket nationwide waivers. And really, it's the imperative. We've talked about this before on the show about wanting to have some sense of where our students are and be actually have a handle on it statewide, because a lot of discussion happened at the state board about the idea of local assessments, because districts are keeping tabs on where their kids are at. The problem is everybody's using something different. And so the idea of having it have some sort of apples to apples comparison was a concern by some of the state leaders in the state board meeting. So they basically have said, look at the feds have said, we're not going to do the waiver. The state then has said, well, within the parameters of what the feds are willing to do, which is some flexibility on the window, flexibility for extending even into the fall, perhaps some testing is what the feds would allow. They would allow for remote learning. They would allow for a number of different things, but everything that they would allow would require a waiver application by the state to get that kind of flexibility. So what the State Board of Education has decided, yes, they probably will pursue a waiver that gives an extended window, at least till this summertime, not yet into the fall. That's not where the state board is at this moment. They would also want to get a waiver, a complete waiver for 2021 on science. So they want to get a waiver on that. And then again, they're going to have the state board staff come back to them on issues related to what kind of assessment that might be done locally. So we're still waiting for a little bit more direction on it. But what we do know is that the outright suspension of assessments nationwide is not going to happen. But in fact, we'll go with a shorter, probably type of assessment, which the state board started working on in November. So they're really ahead of the curve on that. So shorter, bigger window, a little more flexibility, probably no science testing. That's what we know right now.
Thanks, Kevin. And just want to say thanks everybody for tuning in this week. We're going to have a couple special guests on the show next week. Lindsay Dyer and Anthony Thomas will be joining us. And we're going to dig into some topics that we weren't able to address today. We're going to gather a little more information, and we'll look forward to seeing them next week. So Kevin, thank you so much for your time, and we'll look forward to catching you next week.
All righty. So thanks again for joining us for another week of this broadcast.
And I just want to take a moment to remind you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel and share this out over social media. Again, you're our marketing team. I'll also finish by saying, if you have some questions, please send them our way. We'd be happy to address them on a future broadcast. So with that, thanks everybody, and we'll talk soon.